The Paul Leslie Interviews.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to welcome our special guest, Richard Maltby, Jr. Thank you for joining us.
Well, it's a pleasure.
At heart, who is Richard Maltby?
Oh, God, I don't know. You go into the theater, most people go to the theater because they want to hide. You want to be able to be somebody else and be some other character or create something else. It's mostly because you kind of are afraid you're not enough yourself, so you could be something interesting. And, of course, the shock for anybody in the theater, particularly writers, but actors, directors, anybody, that you suddenly discover that the only real currency that you have is yourself. So if you've gone into the theater to hide from yourself, it doesn't work, and pretty soon the only thing you've got to work with is who you are. It's one of the shocks that I think everybody goes through when they start to actually work in the theater. Who am I? I don't know. I'm the son of a band leader, an orchestrator, brilliant orchestrator, and a woman who wanted very much to be a ballerina but stopped and had decided to have a family instead. Somehow that was just part of my genetic makeup. Transferring whatever it is that's inside of me into some kind of story and kind of songs is just sort of where I live. I don't know if that's an answer, but that's...
What was the house like growing up, and what kind of music did you hear growing up?
It's very interesting. My father was a brilliant orchestrator. He was a staff musician at ABC and NBC in the 40s. He then became a traveling band leader in the 50s. He had a number of hit records, Band with a Golden Arm and St. Louis Blues Mambo and some other when the Mambo craze came in. But his bread and butter job was doing kind of transcription arrangements. That is to say, there was an organization that published a lot of international songs, and in order to get them on the air so that they would earn money, they would record them. And my father would record 10 songs in a 3-hour recording session. And I used to go into the recording sessions. I used to sit in the orchestra while he would record. I just sat quietly. He never actually taught me anything about what he was doing, but I was around it all the time. He was quite an artist. 2.5 minutes of an arrangement was a little perfect 2.5-minute work of art. Years later, when I was doing Ain't Misbehavin', I was trying to figure out why I seemed to have a clock inside my head that knew how to structure an evening. I don't know why I knew it. And it suddenly hit me that it came from my father. It came from the sense of structure in my father's orchestrations. And it didn't come to me intellectually. It came through the skin from just being around all those pieces of music. I was always around music. My father played all the time, and we also listened to recording, listened to the radio and listened to symphonic arrangements and things like that. So it just entered me.
Were you always a writer?
No. I wanted to be a set designer. That's really what I loved about the theater was particularly musicals. There was so much scenery and it changed. I had a marionette theater in my basement, but in fact, and I'd call the neighbors in to come in and see stage shows all the time. But in fact, all that happened, I didn't care about the marionettes, and they sort of dangled on the stage. But what I did was they would just be shows in which the scenery would change to music. So that's really what I did. And this lasted right through my second year in college, when it suddenly became vividly clear to me that I couldn't draw, and that I was never going to have a career as an artist, visual artist at any rate. But I wanted to do musicals. I did a musical in 8th grade. I did a musical in my senior year at the prep school I was at Exeter, and we wrote an original musical. I went to Yale because it had a theater, and I was determined to write musicals there. You can find composers who will write the music. You can even find people who will write the script, but nobody ever wants to write the lyrics. And so by process of elimination, I moved in to write the lyrics. And I wrote the lyrics to all of those shows that I did, two at Yale. And when when I came to New York, it really was quite startling to realize that I was a lyricist, because, of course, not all what I intended to be. I don't think I have a natural gift for being a lyricist, actually, if you really want to get down to it. What I am is I'm very hardworking, and I stay at it until I get language that's easy, that's easy and natural. There are some people who just naturally think in lyrics. I'm not one of them.
That's really fascinating. So, what is that process like for you if it's just about finding the fit for the song?
Well, generally speaking, I met David Geyer in our freshman year at Yale, and we didn't much like each other, but I wanted to write musicals, and he was a composer, and there wasn't any other composer, and there wasn't anybody else who wanted to write musicals, and he came to Yale to write musicals as well, but as a composer. So we came together and worked all the time, and eventually wrote 2 full shows. In those days, you could write, they were elaborate, huge productions with an orchestra and everything, which we seemed to do for no money whatsoever. First musical was Cyrano de Bergerac, the most elaborate costumes on the face of the earth, 5 huge sets. We just did it. But David is a very interesting, quirky composer. He writes, I think, glorious melodies that are unexpected and that have odd and interesting rhythms in it. Much more interesting than the rhythms I would come up with if I were to write the words first. And so what we would do is we would work. If we had a song to do, we would have a title or something like that. We would a shape, a structure that seemed to kind of come to us, and then he would work on the music. And when the music was really good, I always felt that the lyric was in the music. Once we had the music right, I felt the lyric was already there, even though there wasn't a single word on it. And then I would set out to write what was already in the music, write the words that would completely correspond to the meaning that was in the music. And I think, if anything is a hallmark of the kind of the songs that David and I write together, it's that if you took the music away, you would say those words anyway. You'd say it as a dramatic monologue. The goal is to make it seem like natural speech, even though it's elaborately rhymed and complex and all sorts of other things.
An observation could be made. A lot of the great songwriting duos, there have been a number of them. Initially, they didn't like each other when they first met.
Well,
I've wondered why that is.
Well, I can't speak for, other people. The thing is that collaboration, it has nothing to do with, the people who are involved in it. See if I can say that in a more clear way. But it's not about personalities, really. And when David and I met, David was a fledgling composer. Over the 4 years that he was at Yale, he learned a great deal about structure. I think I did a lot I taught him a lot and what I taught him was really things that I had only learned by listening to my father. So his work got better and better and better. It was the music. It's the music that eventually I loved. And I think he loved the way that I put words on the music to make it come alive. It was almost irrelevant that we were good friends. We have become incredibly good friends, very close friends, but the love affair is in the music. The love affair is in the writing and in the songs. That has nothing to, that could very well be attached to human beings you don't like. Apparently Gilbert and Sullivan hated each other, and as people, but as artists, they completely fulfilled each other.
What do you think does make for a good songwriting team, a good songwriting collaboration?
There are 2 kinds of collaborations. There's just plain songwriting collaborations like Burt Bacharach and Hal David, or there's show collaborations, which is a kind of different thing. Show collaborations require a unity of sort of theatrical vision. You have to have a shared sensibility that you know what the goal is and you know what good is, and you both agree on what that is. And then you both try to solve whatever dramatic problem arises. David is a very good theater dramatist. He wrote 150 film scores in his life, and he certainly understands music as drama. So many times I will come in so sure that something should go this way, and his reaction will be, yes, but maybe there's this kind of dramatic thing going on. Maybe this is what's really going on. And often I'll drop mine and go with his. The main thing about the collaboration is that it can never be my idea and your idea. I guess that's really what it is. You can have a successful collaboration if it isn't about my idea and your idea. If it is, what is the idea that's going to solve this problem? Because then it's not about personalities. The collaborations that usually break down because somebody says, it has to be my way. This is the way I see it, and it's got to be this way. Even though the other person says, I think it's not a good idea. We have to persuade each other that something's a good idea.
We're talking with lyricist Richard Maltby, Jr. What lyricist do you admire the most?
Gee, of course, Sondheim, you just put him in a category by himself. But I admire Oscar Hammerstein unbelievably. It's not very chic to admire Oscar Hammerstein because sometimes he can be quite sentimental, but even inside of his sentimentality, the brilliant subtlety of his choices is just amazing. He invented musical theater. So many of the ideas that involve using a song to expand upon a character moment in a story, he invented them all. And if you go and realize what he's actually doing when he writes, a simple song like The Sound of Music, the song, or Getting to Know You, or Hello Young Lovers, how much drama he's actually solving in that song, in those songs. It's notable way at the beginning in Showboat when he wrote Can't Help Loving That Man and made that into a complete dramatic scene, which is not only an attractive musical number, but also the revelation to anyone on the stage that Julie has a black history, a history that she is a mulatto, and that she knows this music because that's how she was raised. So he was doing that, and that was written in 1927. It's just extraordinary that he was inventing musical theater way back then. But then, of course, I guess if you go deeper, you can find it in Verdi and Puccini as well, and Mozart. Yeah, that is a musical dramatization. I admire Steve. I admire Oscar Hammerstein. I admire Sheldon Harnick for the fastidiousness of the rhymes and the rhythms. A lot of Alan J. Lerner. And among the younger people, I think Lynn Ahrens is superb. I like a lot of Jason Robert Brown's lyrics. And I love Adam Guettel's work. That's sort of the age gamut that's out there.
You worked with Andrew Lloyd Webber. What was he like to work with?
To begin with, Andrew lives in a universe that you and I don't inhabit. He lives on such a plane. He lives with members of his friends are leaders of government, heads of state, members of parliament, businessmen. He has a definite common touch, and he knows. And I think what's really kind of thrilling about his career is he wants to move the hearts of common people sitting in the theater. He loves theater. I think that's the thing that surprised me most of all. He too had a marionette theater when he was young, and he loves the physical buildings of theaters. He loves the event that goes on in the theater. I like Andrew a lot. I mean, he's a complex person, but I think he can be really brilliant. Interestingly enough, he became a success by him and by he and Tim Rice had a perception, which was that book scenes were killing musicals. They were the dreary parts of musicals. And so they invented the musical form that didn't have any book scenes in Joseph and Jesus Christ Superstar and in Evita. And that was a tremendous breakthrough. Also Cats and Starlight Express. They were all songs they were all just one song after another. And it all sort of changed when he did Phantom of the Opera, in which he used all of the devices of a non-book scene structure with a very structured book story, after which he has written book musicals that had book scenes, and he's gotten trapped the way everybody gets trapped in musicals with book scenes.
What about all of the Barbra Streisand recordings of your songs? How did she come to discover the Maltby and Shire catalog?
She appeared in New York in the mid-'60s, and she was that kook, that odd-looking woman who had this amazing voice. I guess I'm not quite sure of the chronology. I think she had done I Can Get It For You Wholesale, in which she played a minor character, but she had one big comedy number in the second act that was really funny called Miss Marmalstein. And David Shire came to New York because composers can always get work. He came to New York, and instantly he was accompanying dance classes, and he became an assistant musical director on shows and did dance music and things. And in the course of it, he met Peter Daniels, who was Barbra's arranger. And it was clear, I guess it was in the wind that this girl was going to do something. We went down to see her at a nightclub called the Bonsoir once, and it was an extraordinary evening. She sat on a stool. She never moved from the stool. She was wearing a long skirt of men's tweed suit material and a silk blouse. Later, this became incredibly fashionable, but at that time it was completely shocking. And she sang these wonderful arrangements. Most of them were the basis of her first three albums. And Peter Daniels was the arranger who did that. We went backstage afterwards, and Bonsoir has a tiny little dressing room, a thin, narrow dressing room, at the end of which was a very, very overweight man, and he was her dress designer. He was her designer, and came up with these extraordinary clothes. At any rate, we got to know Peter Daniels. David didn't really. And Peter really loved these songs, and he kept putting them in front of Barbra. And so one of the songs was from Cyrano that David and I had written at Yale in our junior year. That was Autumn. That was in the first recording session she ever did. It didn't come out until the third album, but it was in the first recording session. And she recorded 5 more songs that we did, largely because Peter kept putting them in front of her. David was also assistant musical director for Funny Girl, and so that was another opportunity to get the songs in front of her. He knew enough to know that you didn't get anywhere if you said, "I've got a song for you, I think you'll like it." So one day, when they were working together, he just put the piece of music on the piano, and she said, "What's that?" And he said, "It's just a song. I it's not for you. It's for a man." And she said, "Well, I want to hear it." And he said, "No, it's really no. You won't like that." And she said, "Why? You've got to pay for me." So it was Starting Here, Starting Now, which is scarcely a song for a man. But she then loved it and said, "Oh, I want to do this." There was also a moment which is kind of delicious, which is it was going to be in the recording session. It was going to be in a recording session, and she was running through the song, and she liked it and everything. She said, it gets to a point where I just feel like it needs some, extra excitement. And David could feel she's not going to do the song. She's not going to do the song. I've got to come up with something. And so he said, "Oh, well, maybe it's this." And on the spot, improvised that big progression, that big da 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 dee 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 to a modulation. It's a half-step modulation. It's the biggest build-up to a half-step modulation that you can imagine. But it's completely thrilling. And then she said, "Yes, okay, that's it." So that's how it got recorded.
With all of the many songs you've written, is it possible to pick a favorite of yours?
It is very hard. I mean, The Story Goes On at the end of the first act of Baby is certainly a song like nothing else. Song I Don't Remember Christmas from Closer Than Ever is a lyric that nobody has ever written. A lot of the songs that we do are really about subjects that no one's ever written anything about. I do like that. Let's see. There are some things in let me see. I'm trying to think of some of the things in Miss Saigon. The song "I'd Give My Life for You" in Saigon is I think a really good lyric. They're all my children. I love them all.
I'm very curious about the crossword puzzles. How did you get into that? And how does that fit in with the other things that you do with words?
First of all, you need to know that these are not American crossword puzzles. These are the British crossword puzzles. British crossword puzzles don't have definitions. They have clues. They have a sentence that seems to be a sentence, but in fact is a code. that sentence has a definition of an answer and then a description of how to spell it, or another indication of what the word is. It has two indications of the word, one of which is a definition. It's very popular in England and was completely not known at all in the United States. Steve Sondheim, who was a madman about puzzles and games when he first came to New York, loved English puzzles, these English cryptic puzzles. He and Leonard Bernstein used to sit in the back of the theater and do them. So when New York Magazine was founded in the late 60s, I guess, yeah, it would have been late 60s, Clay Felker asked him to do a puzzle, do one of these cryptic puzzles. So he introduced the cryptic puzzle to the United States. And he did them every week for a year, but that was really daunting and time-consuming. And then he did them every 3 weeks, alternating with the contests that Marianne Madden did, the New York Magazine contests. And after that, he did that for a couple of years. And then when Company was about to go into rehearsal, he figured he had to drop it, so he was going to drop it. And I got very upset because I thought the puzzles wouldn't exist anymore. And so I asked him if he wouldn't mind if I took them over. And he said, sure. So I met Clay Felker. And so I started doing the puzzles instead, which, of course, defeated the purpose because since I had made them up, I knew what the answers were when they came out. But Steve had started that, and you know, you have to remember that during the 1960s, between Gypsy and Company, there was funny thing happened on the way to the Forum, and then a lot of failure for him. Anyone Can Whistle, Do I Hear a Waltz, and a general climate in New York theater that Steve Sondheim was a lyricist and he wanted to be a composer, and he was a bad composer. So there was no reason to. He had a lot of time on his hands, and he was feeling very blue, and these puzzles sort of picked him up. Of course, once Company opened, he went straight from Company to Follies, to Little Night Music, and Pacific Overtures, and sort of a show all the time. So he stopped doing the puzzles, but he still did them for me. I would do them, and I would send them to him, and he would vet them. He would catch mistakes. He would suggest improvements and clues and things like that. We had a good time. I think that the reason, and funnily enough, the people who do puzzles, Steven Schwartz does the puzzles. Sheldon Harnick did for a while. Lyric writing is such a technical use of language. You have to say what you want to say, but the accent has to be on the third beat and the eighth beat. The rhythm has to be exactly such, so you're constantly manipulating language in a very, very technical way, and that's what these puzzles were. They're all about misleading you because of the complexity of the English language, misleading you from an answer, from seeing the obvious answer.
Very interesting. What is the best thing about being Richard Maltby?
I don't know. I guess it's kind of a cliche, but I have 5 wonderful children. They are all brilliant in their way. One is a therapist who is also has a business that he's part of, and he himself has 5 children. Another is a real estate mogul, but he's an ex-rock drummer who traveled with rock bands for 10 years and is now buying and selling office buildings. But he's also sort of got a theater arm as well. He's got projects that are going to end up being theater projects. And I have a young filmmaker, a choreographer-director, and a singer-actress also in my bag of tricks. And they're all just fascinating, complex, startling, wonderful kids. Sondheim, who has said everything, really was right when he said children and art. Those are the 2 things that live on after you. Your children and the thing that you've created. When you create things, you don't have a sense of longevity. You just sort of have a sense of doing it right now, and that's the whole thing. But I now have shows. Amos Paven is 33 years old. Baby is going to be 30 years old next year. I'm doing a revival of Closer Than Ever in New York this year, and that's almost 20 years old, over 20 years old. So suddenly I'm confronted with, immortality. These things will probably be out there and performed long after I'm gone, and that's kind of nice.
Our special guest has been Richard Maltby Jr. My last question is very open-ended. What would you say to the audience listening in?
I would say the creation of work for the musical theater is just extraordinarily wonderful. Because it is a vulgar form, because it is about hitting the audience where they live, in their stomachs and their solar plexus. It's not. It is sometimes intellectual, but it is not basically an intellectual art form. It is a popular art form, and therefore you don't often see the incredible artistry that goes to making a show that's successful. I love the creation of a story on the stage. I just think it's extraordinary when music and narrative come together in the creation of a story on the stage. It surpasses all of the elements that are in it, and that's why we love musicals. I would say just avoid the cliche of musicals. Stop thinking of it as something that's become almost a cliche that if you love musicals, you're gay. Please. That would never work, and it's never been true, which doesn't mean that a lot of the artists who create musicals are gay. A lot of them are. A lot of them aren't. It's not the thing to focus on, and musicals don't get inside of us through our brains. They get inside of us through our hearts, and that's what's thrilling to me. I don't know, what do I have to say to people out there? Just keep loving musicals.
Well, I just want to thank you for this interview. It's been a great pleasure to speak to you.
Well, thank you very much, Paul. It was a pleasure. These were very interesting and unexpected questions. I was pleased to have a chance to say some things.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.